You want me to come closer?
Welcome everybody. You can take your seats. Thank you so much for coming to hear this artist talk, Nguyen and Jen Edwards. There's a few announcements I want to bring up about Kenny and his work before we get started. Kenny has an exhibition coming up September 6th. And so again, people that weren't able to come tonight, this is Jamila Brown. Jamila, stand up. I want everybody to see this. So Jamila is a curator, works at the Mint Museum, and she has curated and put together an incredible exhibition called Adaptations, which is Kenny's work. And so she's giving a talk on Friday, September 6th. So if you have any questions about that, make sure you get Jamila. We're really happy to have this talk. Thank you all for coming tonight. I know there's curators and collectors and friends, and we're really happy to have Jen Edwards here. So many of you know Jen and how she's been such a big impact to our community and the country with all of her work. So it's such an honor to have her here. Jen is the chief curator at the Mint Museum, and she's also the head curator of contemporary arts. And she has a list about this long that I can read. But it's just such an honor to have her here. And I'll never forget, she once had one-on-one time with me, and which is rare. It's really hard to get her. And she was telling me an amazing story about San Francisco. And what Jen does is she leaves this visual impact. And she's done it to my heart, my head, and she just really makes work come alive and feel accessible for everyone. And there's like never a dumb question to ask Jen. So thank you. I will turn it over to you guys, and also if you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to grab me or any of Kenny's team. A lot of the team, I want to give a round of applause to them because they're all part of the team. And are all artists either in college or recently graduated. So thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. And thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Kenny, for inviting me to do this talk. I was telling them when I came to do a studio visit a couple of weeks ago, I first saw Kenny's work, I think in 2018 in Hannah's space in Uptown Charlotte when she was there, and fell in love with it. And so I've been very eager to have the studio visit for the last 6 years. Last time it happened. Couple of things. Number one, my watch broke, so I'm going to try and keep us on time by tapping my phone and checking the time. So I'm not checking messages or Instagram. I really am just trying to keep us on time because I want to make sure we leave time for you all to ask questions and to participate. So the other thing that I want to say is Kenny has a stunningly designed website where there is a lot of information. I am going to have a couple of level set moments here tonight where we're going to cover a couple of things about his making process, about his biography, but I really hope that tonight, for the 45 minutes that we're listening to Kenny talk, that the questions I ask are bringing out things that we wouldn't find online. That's my goal for this evening. So if the questions seem unusual or maybe something that you want to know that seems very obvious that I'm not sharing with you, please ask during the Q&A. So I know there will be many things that are interesting that I will pass over, but please make sure you ask. Okay. So that level set, I wanted to start with you explaining how you create your works because it is such a distinctive and unusual process.
So it was when I started approaching the technique that I developed when I work with steel, particularly paint. I started as a fashion designer, and some of the courses that I take from the school we were trained as traditional silk painters, and very traditional way of using ink, using fabric, and that's influenced the way that I work in. But it doesn't bring to me the satisfied that when I make a piece of work, that it doesn't give me that kind of connections in the context where I'm in. So I don't feel like, okay, what I need to do with this material, because silk has been existed for so long, and it's such a priceless material in my culture. So to me, like pulling up a piece of silk, it's like, you've got a vision of, okay, this is a culture you have to be protected. Especially when I move here and move away from my country. So to me, sitting in a studio with a piece of silk as a piece of canvas. And my thought process is, why don't we just do something totally different, right? So I would tear this seal apart. And I think that moment is like my breakthrough moment where the beginning of the process of deconstructions, and then, maybe I will start to construct them back on the canvas to see what happened. So actually the whole process was starting with cutting the silk fabric into a single strip of silk in all different sizes, on different canvas, using acrylic paint as adhesive, to like glue it on the canvas in a way. So to me now, all these medium, they become merging together. The paint become the medium to attack the fabric onto the canvas. And everything what I've done is I work on the floor, let everything dry, and after the drying process, I will try to sculpt on the wall. To me, like the need of pushing the limit of the material. Okay, now silk turn into kind of a beautiful foam on the floor. What else can I do to it? So that's where I come from, the thought that used to some of the techniques that from dressmaking. So I would kind of sculpt them on the wall to see what happened. And to me, it's kind of made me think about whether if a soft materials like silk, if it's possible to make a sculpture out from it, and we'll be able to maintain the shape if we don't have any support with it. So it's a lot of challenging that I like to play with, the whole process. And I like to install my piece different time, every time I reinstall it and turn out as a very different piece. So if you see this piece here that we just put it up today, it may end up to be somewhere else different and it will take another form. Sometimes I would sculpt it very different. Sometimes I would have it interact with the stage. It could be at the corner, it could be on the ceiling, it could drag on the floor, whatever the space that is adapted to.
And that flexibility with the corner, is that something that you also learned from your time in fashion? Because it seems like that's, I wanted to ask you about how fashion. Should we turn this off? Yeah. Done is done. All right, I know you'll all be able to hear me. Do you want to do a test? Say.
Yes.
Yes.
I'll try to speak louder so you
Yeah.
can.
All right, good. It's good and done.
Yes.
So I have a bunch of questions about how your experience as a fashion designer and working with fashion influenced your work, because I find that fascinating, both as someone who likes fashion and because it's a language that is very distinctive within itself, within the fashion construction, but also it's such an accessible art form. And in these unsuspecting ways, I see it's very much entered your work. But so you learned how to manipulate silk, a very difficult material, to get to behave the way you want it to, and it's very unpredictable how it retains color and things like that. So that whole element you learned from your fashion work. But then also every time you put a dress on, if someone wears something differently, the object changes entirely. So is that interest in the malleability of a piece and the endless variations in a single object something that also came from that experience?
I think that's absolutely. When I learned to work with silk, I also learned it's not a simple material. It looks simple and it looks perfect, but it's such a complex material to work with. Especially, it's having to sit for so long that people just think when you hold a piece of silk, it's just automatically think, okay, it's feel good, it the touch is, it's the sense how you touch it, the way how it should dress, it should be a very flowy dress, for example. And to understand that, it would take me probably, until now, I still not completely understand how the material work completely. So it's still in the process of, okay, like, if one dress it could wear different wear cousins, what else can I use this type of character into this work? And definitely the influence from that if I change, for example, if making a dress, if I just change one cut or just, I will sew it differently, it will completely transform the whole forms of the dress that you're wearing. And, stay simple as when I working with my assistants, I would have them to make me cutting the silk. And I have a specific way of cutting this silk. You cannot cut it in this way. There's no way the silk can react this way. You're not allowed to cut this way. So very specific into a tiny little process of, the whole bigger process. And if that changes, the piece can end up to be so much different. So I think the positions working with the materials and understanding material to achieve, what I really want, exactly what it turns out.
We talked about, when I visited with you a couple weeks ago, about how you thought of dresses and fashion pieces as sculpture. And there are a lot of designers who specifically speak of their work in that way. In fact, most of the haute couture designers think of it that way. And then you move and you study really like ceramic and sculpture in undergrad. But here you're taking painting and you're converting it into sculpture on the wall. And so was that idea of taking a form that's usually thought of as a simple drape, a simple straight form, up and down, or vertical, turning it into this constantly moving surface. Did that also come out of that thinking from your fashion time?
I think that true, and one thing that I want to add is, so a lot of time it's not about the form of the surface that you see, but actually to me more important the space between it. So like when you wear a dress, you would think how close it is to the body, right? But there's always just a space like in between the body and the dress. It's the same like this painting. That's what's for the reason I don't keep any support in the back of it. The space that will take you, invite you to get in that space. And that negative space, you may not even see it here, but the space in between it, I think it makes things more interesting. It's make up this form that you see, it's make up the surface, how the light would hit on these. And sometimes we often almost just overlook it. But there's a pocket there, right? When you look at it. And the space is the same like the dress that you wear. And that space is actually making a difference for me.
Yeah. There's also that ripple effect, right? That very much emulates water. And I wanted to talk a bit about the importance of water in your life and in your background. And is that all, do you consciously think of that when you're sort of draping and bunching these on the wall? Or are you thinking about creating a surface, a rippled surface of a body of water?
Absolutely. I actually dream about it for the first 5 years in this state. So it's kind of a very strange feeling, when you move to a completely different country, different cultures. Never in my dream that I would dream that I'm here. I think that's how amazing how the mind works sometimes. And that's, keep thinking about like dreaming, like, oh, when I was in Vietnam, I grew up in a coconut farm where I would go to school on the boat. And such a beautiful memory that, I keep dreaming back about it. So for me to making this work at this scale, it's kind of like gave me the feeling that, oh, I'm returned to that state. It's more like a safe state for me to return it to. And sometimes, it just, yes, the sensation when I'm touching, you're working and sculpting with the materials, but also the fact that all my memory kind of come back, It's the moment that I feel like enjoy the most in the whole process of like sculpting the on the wall. When you see something that could look nothing on the floor, but then it will transform into something impactful, it take up the space, it belongs in this day, it's occupied this day, and it gives you the impressions of, of maybe it's a moving body of water or rippling. To me, like a sense of time too. It's just constant changing.
I'm getting anxious because you're saying all these things that I'm worried are going to throw us up course, but I really want to ask this question now. And I'm trying to make a note, so I'll ask it later, but I'm going to ask it now. So when I first started work in 2018, it was large. You've always worked publicly, like what you've shown publicly has been large scale. And one of the things you said when we met a couple of weeks ago is that you think of your work as self-portraits. These are all self-portraits. And that idea of taking up space, of filling a space, is incredibly powerful. I talk to a lot of artists who work at large scale who say like that is the most gratifying thing. It's why they do something as terrifying as make large work. This is a very scary process. So, sorry, I know there are a bunch of people here. I don't know if you know them, but I'm going to ask you a very personal question that will be recorded on that machine. So, is that a reflection of like your interest in like taking up space and having space? Somebody who has left their homeland and has come to this new land, which is not very friendly a lot of times to anyone. So is that part of that you were projecting that I'm going to take up this space in this role?
It definitely is my way of saying, this voice needs to be heard in a way. So when I moved here, I feel like I'm totally muted and isolated. And during that time of, kind of like try to adapt with the new environment, I just feel like, okay, now, I can't communicate it. I feel like if I no longer say nobody gonna care, in a way. So art is such a powerful thing, and I want to use that in my language, in a way to say, hey, I'm here, like take a look at this. This is how I think is perfect sense, for what I bring into this culture, or for what I bring into for what you can see. And I think it's just for me as a deeper message, as just a metaphor, of the feelings, these kind of like a portrait that I'll imagine myself it would be in my perfect work. Mm-hmm. And so being an artist, I love that, you can control the work that you make, because to me, this is my work, I can do whatever I want to. And sometimes it's just a freedom of making.
Yeah. You mentioned, this is going to get us back on track, you mentioned the language challenges and that barrier when you first came here, not having the language, and communicating through the language of color is something that absolutely fascinates me with your work, because I didn't realize the difference in how the language of Vietnamese handles color and naming color versus the European languages, whether it's dramatic or romantic. So can you talk a bit about that first, about how color is used in language, or how it's referenced in language in Vietnam?
Yeah, so I think learning another language, it's a lot of work. And then, when it takes me back to, actually I have a trip back to Vietnam for the first time in 13 years, and I speak broken Vietnamese. So, it's weird. Like, I cannot work in some of the work in Vietnamese anymore. And my family thought, oh, you forget the language. But no, it just doesn't work this way in English. And besides, seeing my family once in a while, I wouldn't communicate it in Vietnamese at all. So it's kind of like a switch back and forth in your head. In Vietnamese, for example, sometimes when you see like colors, we don't describe either specific green or blue. We would have a single word that called sun. It could mean blue or it could mean green. So when I say sun, it could mean blue or green. If you want to describe a specific colors, blue or green, you have to say like the colors of the rice field, or the colors of the ocean. Then it's blue, and then it's green, and then some very specific like poetic word in Vietnamese. It could mean like, I don't know, like a smoke come out of the house at the end of the day when you cook it for dinner. So that literally what it means. So to me, it's interesting because when I'm finding my work that, I'm going to use a lot of different colors that kind of like remind me of my homelands and, the landscape there, even for some of the work that not describes. And I have a feeling that I can describe it, what it means. Like, it's undefined. So I find it interesting in the language that we use, in exchange with what it means in English and what it means in Vietnamese. And that creates kind of like a conversation that what's going on, The way that I work here, actually, I don't blame out on these colors. Sometimes I come in, I feel we should do a teal, maybe more in the shade of blue than green. Then we would mix, on different colors together to get to that kind of shade. Okay, I feel it's right. Then we should do it. And sometimes, some colors, like, it's very randomly that will work together that I find, I don't know, like, first I don't really realize where it's come from. But then the more I describe it, but sometimes I describe of colors and my system doesn't get it, so, I have to explain it and check it back out. This is what we call in Vietnamese. Maybe I give you this description, and then you will mix the colors. So, that's how the color works for me and the language, and I still learning it.
So when you look at this painting, do you see memories attached to the color? Where we might see orange and blue, not we, when an audience member would see yellow or blue or orange or pink, and it's a color that has harmony and is enticing for everyone has personal reactions to color, of course. But when you look, do you see the river outside your home in the coconut fields? And do you see like yellow of a certain time of day over those fields? And so, does this trigger memories for you instead of just a play of color?
I think it does when I look very close to it. But there's some part when I'm making it, I feel like, okay, this is just a little green for me, and I'm gonna put it here. And then when you look far away, it becomes, I don't know, it's this whole different scene of it's open up to your imaginations. So for me, it's very selective in that. Like some part I feel like, okay, this exactly remind me of that. But it doesn't have to be, like viewing it as a whole.
Do you think you would have felt those memories more 13 years ago? Like, do you think you gotten away from that connection to color and environment as you've moved away from the Vietnamese language?
I think at that point, at 20 years ago, I probably feel it much more.
Yeah.
Because my memory is just like fading away, and so like sometimes I just really try to remember. I think it's just the observe. It's what's surrounding me, and sometimes it's just the thing that if it not record, it's gonna be forgetting. So sometimes if I remember this certain memory that I really love, I would try to make a piece that remind me of that. Just some of my work, there's some pieces called like After the Monsoons. So it's just the feeling of what I feel after the flood in the whole region. What it gonna be look like? So stuff like that. I was just like, oh, there's a little hint right there. Let me just record it, and so I can have it.
Yeah. Because we talked about, and you kind of brought it up just now when you talked about going back for the first time, that your language, your Vietnamese, was no longer, that of a native speaker. It was broken and you were struggling. And you said that your relationship to color, you realized, changed as well. And when you came back and started working on the Eruption series, it was a very different use of color. It was more Western, which I found fascinating. Can you talk about that a bit more?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, after I talk with you, and I talk about it a lot. Like, sometimes it's, artists just like really making their works in the studio until like, Jane will come and say something really amazing, like, wait, what? So, to me, like, when I go back to Vietnam, I actually feel like I'm a tourist. Because I'm afraid to get out on the street with like so many people, and I don't know where I'm going.
Yeah.
And my family was just like, no, you're not supposed to go there, there's somewhere here. So, totally, the feeling of alien is exactly what I feel when I move here.
Yeah.
And now when I return, I feel exactly the same. So I can't process that because ultimately, I come back home, but it becomes, just something very different. It's something that I don't expect it to be encountered to. So I make a series of encounters, and then after that, it's eruptions. From what I observe, and what I feel, just, the life of the people there, and also, it's like how I feel after the trip. It's just a sort of changing of the way how I'm seeing myself now. Yeah. So it's just another level of, okay, after it's settled, after I moved here, everything colors, it's like go toward the directions, and then suddenly go back, everything go back to the chaos again. So I find that very interesting, and I find that I'm actually more American when I'm in Vietnam than I realize that, when I'm here.
Yeah. Do you think the work would change if you made it there? If you went back for a year and changed it there?
I think the work will change a lot.
Is that tempting?
Very tempting to do that. But I don't know, like, and the for reason I didn't go back for a really long time because I don't like that feeling of being, like moving away from where I belong to. Because I finally feel safe and finally belong, and then whatever I go back there, I don't like it so much, or whatever, but everything could happen. And to me, that's a beautiful experience. At the end, if I don't feel that, I'm not able to like make the work in a different directions.
I wanted to ask about the tearing of the silk when you came back here, when you first moved here, right? When you started making these works, and the idea of sitting on the floor, and you often sat on the floor at home, right? Like you ate on the floor at home, and it was, that's a place for working and for commuting, right? And the idea of taking this precious material, the silk, and tearing it, right? Like, was that a moment of trying, with each chair, where you try to distance yourself further from that place to kind of enmesh yourself in this place more? You know, is that action symbolic, I guess is what I'm asking.
That's the moment of acceptance, you know. Before change, you have to accept it. That's what I feel, you know, like, okay, I'm accepted that I need to change myself to be adapted in the environment. I accepted, you know, I'm no longer there, living in Vietnam. My mind had to change, and I accepted that if I don't change my mind about this material, I will keep making the same work over and over. So it's the moment that I feel like, you know, when you accepted that, you know, this material that needs to be completely something different, then it's kind of like give you a feeling, okay, you know, feel good about it. Just do it the way that it's gives you the joy to do it after all. So I think it's, you know, just a moment that I realized, okay, so this is the way to do it.
Yeah. That acceptance is such an interesting challenge in making art, because there is, like, you're creating this very complicated surface that you are then contorting into the shape without a structure behind it, right? So, like, you're battling with all aspects of the material, but then that fundamental gesture of acceptance that you have to make is completely counter to controlling it and manipulating it. And you told me about a residency that you had in Vermont where you became very interested in creating, it was before you were doing these works, and you just did white pieces, white surfaces, and you moved away from that because you couldn't control how things were lit. So the play of light, which is a chance element, but you couldn't control it enough so that chance, whatever came out, would be interesting or like. Could you talk a bit about that? Because that's a very, that has a lot of release and acceptance built into it when you're working with shadow and light on a pure white surface.
Absolutely. I think, so after graduating from the school, I was, you know, go through a different residency, and Vermont Student Center, I think it meant, like, it's a changing that the way that I'm working for all different residencies. So, you know, I went to Vermont in the winter time, and it's cold, so it's snowing every day, and it's like it's a studio of white outside, but also snowing, so everything was white. And of course, you know, the first time I'm in a residency where I meet artists from New York, from Canada, other people like so professional, and they started working right away. So the first day I come to set up my studio, I left my all the colors at home. So I left the box of the most important thing for my residency at home. And when everybody else like working and set up and everything, I'm like, okay, so what I'm doing? Like, and then one of my artists said, oh, make your own gesso. I'm like, I don't know how to make my own gesso. You know, like how
I could grab it.
Exactly. So I would have, like, you know, so I have like a white paint container. I have silk because, you know, I have people to fold it and put in my luggage, and then a piece of canvas which is also folded and put in my luggage. So that's that with me. So I have that much of the material that to work with, and you know. Okay, so sitting here wherever working, drawing, do whatever that I want, and I had to have, and you know, it's such a moment where I realize, okay, maybe we can make something interesting with it. I think the limitations of everything else that pushing me to working with this specific material and this specific just white, you know, and a setup of, you know, everything else was very monochromatic. And so I cut this piece up, and you know, I put this white paint on top of it. So everything is very subtle, everything is just like completely withdrawn from the colors. You will see just the material itself, on a piece of canvas. And the moment I feel like, okay, so what else can I do to it to make it look more interesting? Okay, like maybe it's go on the wall and place it with all different materials. And it doesn't work because it's, the canvas is so thin, the seal is so thin, it doesn't hold the sculpture. But I see the potential, this could develop into something very different. Maybe we just enhance a little bit of, a bigger canvas or maybe a bigger layer of paint. And so, from that moment, when I do the residency, and then the next day I'll come in, when the paint started quite hardening a little bit. And so, I think the limitations of the materials and also the space set up, if I'm not making that trip, I'll probably not be able to make it I'm making today.
Yeah. What are the limitations you're trying to set for yourself now? I mean, you have these giant, multiple giant spaces. You have hands, like multiple hands helping you. But we all need limits to direct us, right? Like we all need guardrails to propel us in directions, or else it's just chaos. How are you setting those limits now? Or is that part of it?
Well, I don't really know the answer for that because, sometimes I feel like the limitations could, like sometimes it could set you back and sometimes it could push you forward. To me now the limitations is, for example, working with the team. That is, sometimes I feel like the struggle of it. And, the limit is, okay, after all this experiment, what new can I bring to the table? What new work should I produce? And I know it sounds like, it's something that I look forward to, but also in a strange way, it becomes a limit.
Yeah.
The direction that I normally not would go to. There's always a process of learning. And if I can push this material to the limit, I also can push it in another way maybe. What if that doesn't happen? What my work could end up to be a very different way.
Is this also why you're starting to work with porcelain?
Yes. So I think the porcelain is my fascinating working with sculptures and also
That's a finicky material.
It is. So my works most of the time end up to be broken or it doesn't work because when I try to make it a surface with like a drapery of the fabric, it doesn't have enough time to dry. And I'm not so patient with and that's why I use acrylic because it dries so quick.
Yeah.
The material somehow doesn't work well with me in a way that it's the passing time when it's drying. I feel like okay, this could do something else, and then I will mess with it. So I don't know. That may be something, and I always wanted to go back to explore it with a medium like porcelain or ceramic.
This sculpture in the other room is stunning. I'm so excited to see where you start going. I mean, I'm a sucker for porcelain, like that's for sure. But I'm really excited. I think that's a fascinating sort of compendium to these pieces. So different, but the color and the movement and all of that, but it feels like a partnership, more like you are in partnership with that material in a way that is more equal, whereas here I feel like you can dominate it more. So I'm excited to see what happens.
It actually reminds me of one of my memories when I have back when we lived on the farm. So like my mom would like cooking things like a big stove, where she would burn on this wood and so when I was a kid, I would use it to like dig up the clay. And I would just make a little figure. I would say like, okay, so this means dog, and it's raining. And then at the end, when my mom finished with the cooking, I would put in the stove and let this, fire in there. It's like a little team. So, who knows? I mean, that's gonna be a really good idea to start another body of work.
I love it, and it's still attached to your family history too, which is. I love that image of like a kid like in there while the mom's cooking, getting ready, and then like as soon as the food comes out, they pop their little creations in there. Okay, I am going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So it's 7:13. So I want to bring it back to the audience for a moment, and I want to talk a bit more. When I was visiting with you, we talked a lot about how you were looking at your works earlier on and thinking about how to create works that would have that impact. How do you think about the people who see your work? Like, do you think of them as just things, like people in the space, or like, do you have a specific? How deeply do you think about how people are looking at the work and thinking about it?
I think that's always a question of being an artist. You be in the studio making up this work, and it doesn't have a life until you show it to people. I think first I want to create something very attractive for people to look at. And second, I just want to tell a story. So theirs is actually a story that embedded into these beautiful things, because visually, when I try to make these pieces, that's why it's so colorful, that's why it's so impactful in the stage. I want to draw people into seeing it. So my most struggle thing when I'm studying and making art is I feel like when I put a piece of art on the wall, and sometimes people just walk by and don't even look at it for like 3 seconds. And so to me, as an artist, that I feel like I'm also being muted, and also feel like, sometimes artists spend hours and hours and hours on their work to be able to show people beautiful things that they make. It deserves more attention, when we see it. And the work that I make now, I think I want to create that kind of illusion, so that confusion when people look at it, they don't know what they're looking at. Sometimes people would think, oh, it's maybe like a metal sculptures, or paper maybe. I don't know, people will start wondering. And then they will get a closer look of it. I'm like, oh, this is made from silk or fabric, whatever material it is. And that had become, I feel like the artist is more present, when people see them. So not only seeing the work alone, but I want people seeing actually the artist who made these works.
Well, I've never seen anyone just walk by any of your pieces. But I can't even imagine that. So I'm going to turn it over to you all for questions. People? Anyone? Yes.
I have a question. Kenny R. Griffin, I've heard so much about you and have been admiring your work from afar for at least a couple months now. It's incredible seeing it in person, and just kind of backing off of the last question, like when I see your work, like there's a sort of like intimidatingness about it, but in the most like graceful, like unfathomable way, and hearing you talk about it gives the best context in the world to seeing it as this sort of like representation of life, and memory. But I think my question lies in my question, but also just my wonder about your work lies in the process, and just this idea of like kind of adapting this process from fashion, which is very like meticulous and like algorithmic, and then sort of creating this thing on the floor that's almost like a map or something, and then transforming it into the most like organic, sort of spur of the moment, like things. But I think I am so interested in like how these pieces physically relate to people as well. And I guess my question is like, do you see a world where these actually interact with people? Like, and it does come back to fashion in some way, but in a very like unconventional way, and how these might actually become like wearable sculptures, or is there something really intentional in the disconnect from people and having them as these sort of like still but moving pieces, you know?
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah.
It's fun. I think that there's many times that I try to make this type of work completely up from the wall. And I think me and Jim will also discuss about that too. What I feel like is the whole process that when I'm making this is like mimicking the way how I adapted the environment. It needs some kind of a host, for the piece to be able to standing out, or like just standing or just adapt it to. That's why I feel like it's the need of it to have some kind of surface for it to merging into that space, for example, walls or the ceiling or floor, and something hidden and something, like it have the negative space. There's a space that's unseen, and that I think is important for me. Fashion is when I have a moment working in fashion back then, I feel like it's not the word for me because it's like pretty non-stop. It's just, after the season, you only have to do the next season and so on. With fine art, I feel like I'm finding that self-reflection time. I feel that resting space where, I would sit down and think about my work. And, I have time to look at it from far away, or, sometimes I sit in my studio and just watching all these work to understand, what I feel. And fashion doesn't really make that kind of feeling. So to me, it would be a possibility, but I think it would take away the kind of adaptations of, the piece onto a specific space.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's an awesome response, and it makes sense because it's like, I think like fashion is ultimately something that is functional for people. It's like meant to just be like a function. So I was wondering if you would kind of take it that route, because I think part of the powerful thing, especially from like learning what you said, is like that this thing is not functional. It's just it's art.
Right.
Yeah.
However, I think on that note, actually people would have changed to interactive with the piece. Like if you buy a dress, you can wear it. So actually it's all happened during COVID at a time when I started like selling these work online for collectors. And I can't travel, so we'll make a video instruction for people how to install the work. And so I would roll the work in a tube. It's very easy for transportations. And I just ship it to the collectors. And so I send them like written instructions and video instructions. And then the collector actually put up the set. So they actually have a little bit of the interactions with the work. And to me, if I sculpt it, it could turn out so much different. And you sculpt it, it may turn out very different. And it's all tagged just a little pin that go onto the wall, so then you can manipulate it the way that you want it to. And people get really interested in that. They actually like making time lapse of how we installed it and then saying it to me. And like, what do you think? I'm like, that's the best version that you can. I love it. So in a way, it's very interactions and they're very playful. And I know that when people want to own, for example, a collector want to own the piece of work, they also, I feel like they have the right to put their voice over the piece of the work they own. So that's a little collaboration between the artist and the collector in a way.
the idea of the space as host, like that's such a beautiful way to think about the environment where the pieces hang. That's a very generous, a very collaborative way to lean into, where your work is installed. I don't know many collectors who would think of. Yeah, beyond the challenge of hanging more. Did you go back and reinstall for anyone?
Actually, no. We do have collected from like Senegal. It's the random display on the words, and there's no way that we can make it there. El Salvador. So it's a place that I know that I would definitely cannot travel to it, or they don't even have like those professional artists to. So but to me it's interesting because I can see these work will be handled so much different.
Other question? Yes.
Kenny, I do have a question about the process of when you have your work in different spaces, you allow different institutes or collectors to change the orientation or install it with it they want to. I want to ask, did you adopt this practice from El Natsui? He's a West African artist who uses metal caps to create these fabric or sculptural-like pieces, and he has that same practice. So I wanted to ask it in any way, did any of his practices from a West African artist influence the way that you install your work?
Absolutely. Well, actually, first I call these painting. So to me, it's like a pantry surface. So it's a lot of time. I actually wrote a paper about El Natsui when I went to school. So it's the practice that have been existed for actually longer than we thought it is. Even like Sam Gilliam, he would handle his canvas in the same way. He would do the canvas and just drag on the floor, or like Robert Morris who do the felt piece. He would just say, okay, so this is go to the mat, and you just need to let it drop down the floor, and here's a felt piece, right? So I think it's a lot of time when we get learning through the art history, and we see, how artists making work and influence each artist in a way that, it didn't make sense for the context of the piece. So to me, it's not so much about, why do I have to do this way, but it makes sense for me to make the work that constantly changing, to be sculpted, because I feel like, this is a part of my video history. So to me, from the process of cutting the silk, mixing the paint, installing the paint, everything is have to be make sense to me as a whole. And I think it's a part of selective in your process of making work too. If certain techniques, certain colors, certain way of installing work doesn't make sense. Like as I always wonder when I went to school, like why would we have to paint on a straight sheet canvas? Everybody would paint in the same straight sheet canvas. It's a rectangular, and I'm not a frame person, so I always tend to make my work because sometimes a frame could be more expensive than the artwork itself. To get away from that tradition, so to me, it's the freedom of idea.
Thank you.
Yes.
I've never dreamed of a way of describing color without just a word of cobalt or navy or, sky, blue, Carolina blue, whatever. I would love if you would pick a couple of colors from what's behind you, 2 or 3 maybe, and describe them the way you would describe them before you came to this country. When you said the color of smoke drifting out of the house while someone's cooking dinner, that's forever burned in my head. What that color is, it's just blown my mind that there's an entire culture that doesn't use a word for a color. And so
There's a lot of cultures. That's
well, yeah, so that just shows
just
my
wanted to
limits,
throw that out there.
That's just the limits of the languages that I've been exposed to that don't that describe color the same way that
Yeah,
the
yeah.
English language does,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So shame on me for not being, this is just like, I just love that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can name several colors in here. Like I often use that kind of like colorish paint. So in Vietnamese we call it it's lacam. It means the colors that you extract from a specific blend. So there's a blend that we use for food coloring. So we'll pick that blend and we cook it out. So the blend is like green like this. But when you cook it, it will turn into that kind of purple. So we use a lot of that kind of coloring in like sticky rice and like dessert. Then my mom always cooked with that. So and she blamed it at home. So then I went like I attracted that kind of like a relish thing that reminded me of that. The green and the blue. So it's just an undivided color. Like somebody will call it green and somebody will call it blue. And green and blue in Vietnam, in Vietnamese, we have so many ways to describe it. So beside the color of the ocean, the color of the sky, a lighter blue, more like a cobalt. And then, there's the way of describing these colors I really love. The colors of the mulberry field go to horizon. So that's the green. The greens of so in Vietnamese literatures and even in poems when people make so that have often described as the colors of separations. So that green, when you see that green, that means your lover or your wife or your husband like go far away that you can't even see it. All you see is a mulberry field gets all the way to the horizon. So it's that kind of green that is reminding of the separation. So it's a beautiful way of describing colors.
Amazing, yeah. Beautiful for sure.
Yes. Okay. So there's so much we didn't discuss tonight. I'm sure you can, just looking at this single piece, there's so many other things we could have discussed and pulled out of it and talked about. So please come to the Mint on September 6th and see Jamila's show. Jamila Brown has done extraordinary work curating this beautiful installation of Kenny's pieces. So their conversation is going to be further enlightening for this incredible work. Thank you so much for being here. And hang out and talk to Kenny, get some wine, and it's a party. Thanks for being here.
Favorite pictures are